They called her Ahyoka, which meant she brought happiness. But on the night the elders banished her, her name became a curse whispered in shame. She stood at the edge of the council fire with ash in her hair and tears on her cheeks, her hands bound not by rope, but by the betrayal of her own people. Around her the tribe formed a tight circle, faces lit by firelight, eyes heavy with judgment. She had fallen in love with a man they deemed unworthy, not an enemy, not a white settler or outlaw, but a Cherokee warrior from another clan. And for that, they said she had broken sacred law. She hadn't hidden it. She hadn't lied. All she had done was meet him by the river, under moonlight, where no one could twist their love into something ugly. His name was Tyanita, brave as they came, but not of their bloodline, not part of their future. The elders called it betrayal. Her mother called it shame. And Tyanita, they said he had run, fled into the forest when they found out, too afraid to stay and fight for her. "Your heart has dishonored your people," said the chief, "and so your feet must leave our soil." Ahyoka didn't speak, didn't cry. She simply bowed her head as her family turned their backs one by one. She left that night, no horse, no food, just the clothes on her back and a single blanket from her grandmother's hut. The forest swallowed her, its shadows colder than exile, its silence sharper than the council's words. Each step away from her people felt like tearing bark from a tree. Slow, splintered, irreversible. By morning, her body ached. Her lips were cracked. She walked until her legs gave out and she fell to her knees in a frozen clearing, the wind screaming through the trees like the ghosts of her ancestors. She whispered his name. Once, twice, louder the third time. Tyanita. Nothing answered. Not birds, not wolves, not love. She built a fire with trembling hands, her eyes rimmed red and curled beneath the blanket like a child too tired to dream. But just as her eyes began to shut and the flames licked the stars, a branch cracked, then another. She sat up, heart thundering, and from the darkness a figure stepped into the light, cloaked in deer hide, mud on his face, blood on his arm. Tyanita. He hadn't run. He had followed her into exile. And in that moment, the girl who brought happiness knew she had one thing left the tribe couldn't take. Him. Tyanita didn't speak right away. He simply knelt beside the fire and stared at Ahyoka, his eyes filled with everything he hadn't said the night before. Rage, sorrow, and something deeper still. Devotion. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, and a gash across his forearm wept red into the earth. "They said you ran," Ahyoka whispered, her voice brittle from cold and disbelief. He shook his head slowly. "I was running to find you before they cast you out." Her heart clenched. Even in exile, she had believed their lies, believed the worst because it was easier than hoping. Tyanita looked older in the firelight. Not from age, but from the weight of what he had chosen. To leave his clan, his kin, and everything he knew, just to follow a girl banished for love. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a strip of dried meat, placing it gently in her hands. "Eat," he said. "We need strength. The forest does not weep for lovers." She chewed slowly, the taste rough but grounding. As the fire popped and cracked, he tended to his wound with the calm of someone who had bled before. "We can't stay here," he said. "There's a river 3 days east. If we reach it, we'll find game, fresh water, maybe shelter." Ahyoka nodded, her mind spinning. They had no map, no guidance, only each other. "They'll hunt us," she said. "Not all, but some, if they fear we'll bring shame across clans." Tyanita's jaw tightened. "Then we keep moving. We build a life they cannot erase." Dawn crept over the trees, smearing gold across frost-covered branches. They buried the fire in silence and gathered their few belongings. With every step into the wilderness, Ahyoka felt her old life crumbling behind her. The songs she once sang, the roots she once knew, the river trails and dance fires, and the scent of sweetgrass on her mother's robe. Gone. But beside her walked the boy who had once braided feathers into her hair and whispered stories into her dreams. He had followed her not because it was safe or right, but because love had no clan, no council, no border. As they walked deeper into the woods, far from the chants of judgment and the watchful eyes of blood-bound law, Ahyoka glanced sideways at him. "Will you stay even when the nights freeze and the food runs out?" Tyanita didn't hesitate. "I will stay until your name means honor again, and even after that, I will still stay." And so, with hearts bruised but bound, they stepped into the unknown. Not as fugitives, but as something stronger. As one. The forest grew thicker the farther they walked, its limbs clawing like old memories refusing to let go. On the third morning, they found an abandoned hunting camp, a collapsed lean-to, and a stone pit full of soot. Ahyoka dropped her pack and stared at the blackened rocks as if they could speak. "Someone lived here once," she murmured. "Someone who left." Tyanita circled the camp slowly, scanning for tracks, his senses sharp. "They're not coming back," he said. "No fresh marks, no ash scent. We'll burn this place clean, make it ours." That night, he built a new fire from scratch, stacking the old wood like bones beneath a flame that belonged only to them. Ahyoka sat nearby, clutching her blanket around her shoulders, staring into the embers. "Do you ever miss them?" she asked. "Your clan?" Tyanita didn't answer right away. He sharpened a stick, eyes downcast. "I miss the stories, the smell of cedar after rain, my grandfather's voice, but not enough to turn back." She nodded, then reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out something small, a beaded armband, red and black, once worn by her little brother during ceremonies. She held it in her lap like it might disappear. "I keep thinking about what my mother said, that I've shamed her blood." Her voice cracked. "I wonder if she burned my name from the family tree." Tyanita looked up, his face unreadable in the flickering light. What they burned was their own compassion. He rose, stepped beside her, and gently plucked the armband from her fingers. "But fire doesn't only destroy," he said. "It clears the old to make room for what comes next." Then he dropped the band into the flames. Ahyoka gasped, half rising. "What are you—" But he stopped her with a hand to her shoulder. "Let it go," he whispered. "Not him. Not your love for him. Just the pain they gave you with it." Together they watched it burn, red fading to black, black to nothing. It smelled like memories. It sounded like goodbye. And somehow it felt like release. Later that night, curled beside Tyanita beneath the lean-to he rebuilt, Ahyoka wept into his chest. Not from fear, but from the ache of healing. For every insult slung across the fire, for every face that looked away, for every step that brought her here, to a place where love had no witnesses but the stars. "I was afraid I would forget who I was," she whispered. "You didn't," he said, pressing his lips to her forehead. "You remembered something they forgot." "What's that?" "That love isn't a crime." And as the flames died to a whisper, so did the last echoes of her old life. By the fourth day, hunger had become more than a whisper. It was a sharp voice in Ahyoka's stomach, echoing with each step. The dried meat Tyanita carried was gone. Their only meal the day before had been a handful of frozen berries she found under a patch of moss. Her head swam when she stood, her fingers stiff with cold. Tyanita noticed, though he didn't speak it. He'd begun walking ahead more often, scouting silently with a spear he'd carved from a long branch, its tip fire-hardened and crude. He moved like the old warriors in her clan's stories, quiet, alert, eyes always scanning the ground for prints, scat, signs of life. The deeper they walked into the wilderness, the more the trees leaned in, branches woven so tightly that sunlight slipped through only in fractured threads. The wind no longer howled. It hissed, sliding over their skin like blades. That afternoon, as they reached the edge of a frozen creek, Ahyoka's knees gave out. She collapsed with a soft thud, her palms scraping the icy earth. "I'm fine," she said before Tyanita even turned. But he was already beside her, his arms wrapping around her shoulders as he lowered her gently to a patch of moss beneath a pine. "You haven't eaten in 2 days," he said, voice tight. "I'm used to hunger," she whispered. "I'm not used to watching you suffer," he replied. He knelt, cupped snow into his hands, and held it to her lips. She drank slowly, the cold burning down her throat. "Rest," he said. "I'll return by sunset." She tried to argue, but her voice faded before it reached the air. Her body was giving in, even if her spirit wasn't. She watched him disappear into the trees, his back straight, spear gripped tight. Hours passed, shadows lengthened. The fire she built with shaking hands sputtered, then steadied. She kept herself busy gathering twigs, breaking them with frozen fingers just to keep from thinking. Of the council, of her brother's silence, of the dream she had the night before where her mother turned her back and vanished into the fog. Then she heard it, the crack of branches. Fast footsteps. She scrambled to her feet. Tyanita burst through the trees, a snare in one hand, a rabbit in the other, blood on his tunic but fire in his eyes. "We eat tonight," he said breathlessly. She rushed forward, tears stinging her eyes. "You found something?" "I found hope," he said. "And I'll keep finding it, if it means I never have to watch you fall again." That night, they ate in silence, fingers warming around meat and fire. Hunger faded, but something stronger bloomed in its place. Not just survival. A bond sealed with sweat, snow, and stubborn devotion. The storm rolled in like a beast with no name, its growl low across the horizon as wind whipped through the trees and scattered ash from the morning fire. Tyanita had seen the sky change before, seen the clouds flatten like heavy stones, the birds vanish, the silence before the storm spoke louder than thunder. "We'll stay low today," he said, wrapping the rabbit hide he'd cleaned around Ahyoka's shoulders. "Ridge path is too exposed." She nodded, still sore from the days before, but stronger now. Her cheeks had more color, her hands steadier. They had eaten. They had survived another night. But as they packed the camp and turned east, a flicker of movement stopped them cold. A figure stood on the ridge above, still, solitary, watching, cloaked in buckskin, face painted, a stranger. Ahyoka's heart skipped. Her hand instinctively found Tyanita's. "Do you recognize him?" she whispered. Tyanita didn't speak. He stared long and hard, his eyes narrowing. But he's seen us." The man didn't move, didn't signal, just stood like a tree that had always been there. Then, slowly, he raised a hand. Not in threat, but in recognition. A gesture from an old code. Tyanita lifted his hand in return. Then the man turned and vanished over the ridge. "Who was he?" Ahyoka asked, breathless. "Another exile?" "Maybe," Tyanita murmured. "Or maybe a scout." They changed direction quickly, moving toward denser woods, where the pines stood shoulder to shoulder, and the snow hadn't yet crushed the underbrush. As they walked, the air felt different, charged, like the wind itself was holding a breath. "Do you think he'll come back?" she asked. "If he meant harm," Tyanita said, "he wouldn't have raised his hand." But even as he said it, his jaw stayed tight, his fingers never far from his knife. That night, they camped deeper in the forest, using bark and moss to insulate the lean-to. The fire was small, barely a whisper, just enough to keep them from freezing. As Ayoka drifted off, curled beside him beneath the furs, her mind spun with questions. Who was the man? Why was he alone? Had others been cast out like them? Were they truly alone out here, or walking a trail already carved by broken hearts? In the dark, Tyanita sat with his knife across his knees, watching the trees, his eyes never closing. And just before the fire faded, he whispered, more to himself than her, "If others watch, let them. But if they come for you, they'll know this. No one banishes you again while I still breathe." And with that, the forest slept, holding its secrets until morning. They were woken by silence. Thick, unnatural silence, the kind that blanketed the world before something shifted. Tyanita stirred first, hand gripping his knife as he scanned the dim morning light filtering through the pine branches. Ayoka sat up slowly, the warmth of their fire now cold ash beneath her. Then they heard it, a branch snapping, deliberate, not the break of a wandering deer or windfall. This was human. They stood together as shadows emerged from between the trees. 5 men, cloaked in bone-colored leather, each marked with ceremonial paint. Not warriors from her clan, not from his either, but they carried themselves like men who judged for a living. One stepped forward, older, with braided gray hair and an eye clouded by age or injury. He carried no weapon, but his voice was sharp as flint. "Ayoka of Red Branch," he said. Her heart seized. No one had spoken her full name since the night she was cast out. "You broke the law of bloodlines," he continued. "You abandoned the wisdom of your elders, and now you flee with a traitor." "He is not a traitor," she said, voice trembling but clear. "He is my equal. My heart." One of the younger men spat on the ground. "Then you're no better than him." Tyanita stepped between them, his stance like stone. "We owe you nothing. We left because your law had no room for love." The elder studied him. "You speak like a man, but a man protects his people, not steals one from another house." "She wasn't stolen," Ayoka said. "She was abandoned." The elder's eye narrowed. "We do not chase those who have already chosen death." Tyanita's jaw clenched. "Then why are you here?" The wind shifted. The men glanced at each other before the elder spoke again. "Because you are not the only ones who have left. Others have strayed, others have questioned. If word spreads that the banished find peace, others may follow." Ayoka stepped forward, defiant. "And what will you do? Drag us back in chains? Stone us in the square?" The elder's voice dropped. "Number we will watch. And if you fail, if hunger breaks you, or fear, or winter, we will let your bones tell the others the truth." Then, as swiftly as they came, the men disappeared into the trees, silent as ghosts. Ayoka collapsed to her knees, breath ragged. "They'll come again." Tyanita nodded. "Then we give them nothing but strength to see." "Even if we die?" she asked. He helped her to her feet, gripping her hand tight. "Especially if we die. Because if love was a rebellion, then they were already warriors in a war worth fighting." The forest opened like a blessing, and there it was. The river. Wide and silver beneath the cold sky, its waters moved slow but sure, curling past the rocks like whispered promises. Ayoka dropped to her knees at its edge, cupping the icy water in her hands and pressing it to her lips. It tasted like freedom, like something the council could never poison. Tyanita watched her from the slope, his eyes scanning the tree line, every muscle still tight with wariness. No tracks, he finally said. If they followed, they did not come close. Let them watch, Ayoka replied, her voice steadier than he'd ever heard it. I will not bow again. He came beside her and knelt, washing his wounded arm in the current. The scab broke, but the cold numbed it. This place will keep us, he said, if we respect it. They began building before the sun hit its peak. A frame from fallen logs, bark for walls, dried grass for the bed. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. As they worked, Tayanita spoke less and less. His hands were steady, but his eyes held a storm. What is it? Ayoka asked, as they bundled pine branches for insulation. You're quiet. He didn't look up. The river runs through many lands where exiles like us live in silence, scattered, forgotten. I wonder if we'll become them. We're not forgotten, she said, placing her hand on his chest. We're remembered by each other. He exhaled, a slow breath like winter wind. And if the council returns? Then we show them this. She turned, sweeping her arm at their half-built shelter, the river, the furs drying over a line, the rabbit stew simmering over the fire. We show them what love can build in the ashes of law. As dusk fell, the river gleamed like molten steel. Ayoka sat by the fire, humming a lullaby her grandmother once sang. Her voice cracked on the second verse, but she didn't stop. Across from her, Tayanita listened in silence, carving a flute from a narrow branch. Play it for me, she said when she finished. I don't know how yet. Then learn, she smiled, and teach our children. His head jerked up. Children? She looked away, suddenly shy. Someday. Tayanita stood and crossed the fire, kneeling before her, dirt on his cheeks, the flute still in his hand. If this is our place, he said, then let it be where new songs begin. She leaned forward, her forehead against his, and the river behind them whispered on, carrying not warnings, but witness, to their exile, to their survival, to the love that dared outlast the law. They came on a foggy evening, 5 shadows moving through the trees like ghosts reborn. Ayoka saw them first, her hand going instinctively to the small hatchet she kept by the fire pit. Tayanita was already standing, spear in hand, jaw tight. But the figures didn't charge. They stepped slowly into view, faces tired but not hostile. Travelers, exiles, like them. The leader, a tall woman with silver hair braided in beads and bones, raised an open hand. We smelled the stew, she said, her voice gravel and wind. We bring no fight, just stories. Tayanita didn't lower the spear, but his grip loosened. From where? From everywhere, she said. We are the ones left behind, the ones banished for reasons too small to survive in cages too tight to breathe. Ayoka stepped forward slowly. You've been watching us. The woman nodded. Long enough to know your shelter holds more than wood. It holds defiance. It holds hope. One of the others, a young man with a scar running from temple to chin, dropped to his knees. You built this with nothing but love? Tayanita exchanged a glance with Ayoka, then nodded. Love and pain. That's enough, the old woman said, to start a fire, even here. They shared food that night, passing bowls and silence, then words. Stories of girls sent away for refusing arranged marriages. Boys exiled for weeping over their fallen brothers. A man punished for dreaming of peace when his chief demanded blood. The fire crackled with truth. Ayoka sat close to Tayanita, their shoulders brushing, their eyes wide as the circle grew warmer. You are not alone, the silver-haired woman said, as she added wood to the fire. You are the beginning of something, a place where love writes the rules, where exile becomes invitation. Tayanita leaned forward, his voice low. And if the councils come? Then we show them what they feared, the woman said, her eyes sharp. We show them unity. That night, with strangers snoring near the fire and the river humming like a lullaby, Ahyoka lay awake, staring at the stars through the cracks in their shelter. "Did we start something?" she whispered. Tyanita, lying beside her, whispered back, "No." "We revealed something." "What?" she asked. He pulled her close, his lips against her ear. "That the law without love is just a cage, and people weren't meant to live in cages." She smiled against his chest, the firelight flickering across her face. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, not as a warning, but as applause. Something had begun, something more than survival. A new council, a new tribe. One born not of blood, but of belief. They came at dawn, 5 riders cloaked in wolf pelts, faces covered in ceremonial paint, arrows slung low across their backs. Not scouts, not strangers, council guards, real ones. Their arrival cracked the stillness like ice underfoot. The newcomers from the night before stood to form a protective arc around the shelter, hands on blades, but Tyanita raised his arm. "No weapons," he said. "Let them see what we've built." Ahyoka stood behind him, her heartbeat a war drum in her chest. The lead rider dismounted first, peeling back his hood to reveal a familiar face. Her cousin, Teota, the one who'd averted his gaze when she was banished, too afraid to speak then, too obedient to care. "You've drawn attention," Teota said, voice sharp. "The elders sent word. There's talk of rebellion." "This is not rebellion," Tyanita replied, his tone firm but calm. "This is recovery." Teota looked past him, eyes scanning the shelter, the river, the women stirring stew over the fire, the children of the exiled playing with sticks in the snow. His mouth twitched. "You've built a village." "We've built a life," Ahyoka said, stepping forward. "One they never let us have." "You broke the law," he replied. "The law that says love must fit in neat bloodlines. That says tears are weakness, that banishment is justice." "The law that fears anything it cannot control," Tyanita added. "That law broke before we ever did." Teota's grip tightened on his reins. "I was sent to deliver a message. Disband, return, kneel, or be hunted." "Then deliver ours back," Tyanita said. "We kneel to nothing but truth." Teota's eyes flicked to Ahyoka again, searching, maybe, for the girl he once played with beside the river. But all he saw was a woman who had survived fire, and lit her own. He turned without another word, mounted, and rode off. The others followed, leaving nothing but hoofprints in the snow and the weight of the decision they would carry back. That evening, silence ruled the fire circle. No songs, no stories, just crackling wood and thoughts too big for words. "Do you think he'll lie for us?" Ahyoka asked. "Or betray us?" "Neither," Tyanita said, sharpening a stick into an arrow. "I think he'll wait to see what happens next." She nodded. "And what will happen next?" He looked around, at the children laughing in the dusk, the stew boiling in the pot, the old woman teaching 2 exiles how to weave grass into rope. "We'll live, loudly, kindly, and if they return, they'll find something they didn't plan for." "What's that?" Ahyoka asked. "A people who refuse to vanish." The stars blinked awake, and the river kept singing. And somewhere in the distance the old laws cracked, slowly but surely, under the weight of something they had never planned for. Love that wouldn't leave. Spring came late, shyly. The trees began to bud like they were afraid to trust the warmth, and the river swelled with melted snow, its song louder now, like it had found its voice again. Ahyoka stood on the ridge overlooking the camp. Not a shelter anymore, Not even a village yet, but something alive. Tents had become cabins. Fire circles had turned into gathering spots. There were gardens now, small, stubborn plots of greens and roots that defied the rocky soil. The council never returned. Or maybe they did, in secret. But they never stepped forward. Perhaps the silence was their answer, or their surrender. Tyanita carved new poles for the weaving frame, his shoulders leaner now, his hair tied back with a strip of dyed cloth. Children followed him everywhere, asking questions, mimicking his movements. "Is he a chief?" they'd whisper. Ayoka always smiled, numbered just a man who stayed. She spent her days teaching stories, ones the council had once banned. She told of the wind gods and thunderbirds, of women who loved without asking, of men who healed instead of hunted. Around her, others did the same. What began as whispers had become declarations. They no longer hid their exile. They wore it proudly. "You should name this place," the old silver-haired woman said one night, as they sat beneath the stars. "It's earned that much." Ayoka looked at Tyanita across the fire, his face lit orange by the flames, his eyes soft with sleep. "I already did," she whispered. "I call it home." That night, she and Tyanita lay beside the river in silence. No one else around, just water, stars, and a future they were finally brave enough to imagine. "We could go further," he said softly. "Past the next ridge? Start again there?" "No," she replied, resting her head on his chest. "We did too much running. This time we let roots grow. And if they come back? Then we give them food and tell them to sit and listen." His hand found hers. "Do you regret it?" She turned, placed a kiss on his collarbone. "Only that I didn't leave sooner." He smiled, rare and full. "They feared what we would build," she said, her voice a hush. "But they never imagined we'd build something better than them." "That's because they never built with love," he replied. The wind swept through the grass like a hymn. And from the ashes of their banishment, they had made something unthinkable. A home without shame. A place where no child would be told who to love. A life not given, but claimed, together, always.